Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, November the 12th, 2025. Today there is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars in Sagittarius, and that is an aspect I certainly want to look at. I also want to look at the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, which has been in the news for all the wrong reasons. They edited a tape involving Donald Trump to show him in the worst possible light. As a result, Donald Trump is threatening to sue them for a huge amount of money. Lawyers have already been consulted, letters have been sent out, so it doesn't look good for the BBC. So, what is going on with this organisation? And at the end of this video, I will be looking at the BBC. I'll be looking at some of the charts of the BBC, remembering that the BBC started, over 100 years ago, I think in October 2022. But, before I look at the BBC and have a detailed look at the Mercury-Mars conjunction, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, November the 12th, 2025. So here is the chart for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So this chart set for noon, November the 12th, 2025, New York time. It shows that the moon is in late Leo, and it actually goes into Virgo at just before midnight London time. So that would be sort of earlier in the day, sort of early evening in New York. The moon moves into Virgo this afternoon. In California, moon moves into Virgo. So if you are in the Americas, there will be a substantial part of the day where the moon is in Virgo, but I think for most of us, we can regard it as being yet another moon in Leo day, and the moon makes a square to Uranus just before it changes sign. So when you think about moon square Uranus, this is the first major aspect involving the moon and Uranus in Taurus. Remember, Taurus has gone back. It's no back out of Gemini, now in Taurus. So you've got moon in Leo, moon square Uranus in Taurus. Two planets in fixed signs, and this aspect can be quite stubborn and quite willful. And when you see moon in Leo can be quite proud. Moon in Leo doesn't like to back down. So if you find that people are stubborn today, just don't be surprised about it, and don't necessarily be stubborn yourself. I mean, it's not necessarily a good idea. And aside from that, we've got a last quarter moon. So we have the moon in Leo, making a 90-degree aspect to the sun. So this is a waning moon. The moon is getting smaller, and so with a last quarter moon, there might be the question of what else needs to be done. I mean, this lunar cycle is coming to an end. We have a new moon coming up on November the 20th at 28:29 Scorpio. So what is left? And it might be that some of us feel a certain sense of hurry, that if we don't get it done now, we might sort of miss our chance. But can we do it now? We shouldn't forget that Mercury is retrograde, and when Mercury is retrograde, things can take longer than usual. But still, this might be a last chance to sort something out, before this lunar cycle comes to an end. And arguably, the most important aspect of the day is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. There it is. Mercury is retrograde, and it's sort of smashes into Mars, which is of course going forward. And interestingly, this Mercury-Mars conjunction happens pretty much at the same time as the Moon-Uranus square. So we've got the Mercury-Mars conjunction at 11:15 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Got Moon square Uranus at 11:29 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So, very close. And so you could say that the Moon square Uranus is acting as a kind of a propellant to the Mercury-Mars conjunction. It's giving it, added strength. So, what is this Mercury-Mars conjunction about? Well, I am going to talk about this conjunction in greater detail at the end of this video, but basically it is about the way we communicate. It's about the way we think, the way we talk, and it can be quite an angry aspect. Many of us, might be annoyed, or we might encounter other people who are annoyed. And, because it's in Sagittarius, it's possible that, some of us, say things that, we later regret. There is a certain sort of verbal impulsiveness to this Mercury-Mars conjunction. And I think all of us will be affected by it. And as I go through the 12 signs, I think that, most of these signs will pick up on this conjunction. So that's the broad picture. If we set things for New York, if we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, as a representative of Australasia, then the moon is sort of, as always, it's going to be earlier in the sign at noon in Sydney compared with noon in New York, and so but it's still in Leo. So I don't really think that we're going to see, a huge amount of difference there. I mean, we're still dealing with a last quarter moon. In fact, the last quarter moon is possibly more prominent in Australasia than it is in the Americas. So, moon at 17 Leo square, sun at 19 Scorpio. So if you are in Australia, you may really feel that urgency. Last quarter moon, a last chance perhaps to do something before the new moon in about a week's time. And turning to the heliocentric view, which is where we put the sun at the center of the chart, and Venus is square Jupiter. Venus is also opposition Mercury. The great thing about heliocentric charts is we see aspects that we would never see in a geocentric chart. Geocentrically, it is impossible for Mercury and Venus to be opposition one another. They never get that far apart. From the Earth's perspective, Mercury and Venus hug the sun. But in a heliocentric chart, well, any aspect is possible, including this opposition between Mercury and Venus. And with Mercury opposition Venus, the challenge might be, well, how do we relate? How do we get on with people? And at the same time be open and honest. So, Mercury wants to be open, Mercury wants to communicate. Venus is perhaps, the principle of relating. But with Mercury and Venus in opposition, it might seem that the two principles are incompatible. But we do have a T-square. Jupiter is on the T, Mercury, very close to the square of Jupiter. So, Jupiter is the answer. And if Jupiter is the answer, then that means getting some kind of wider perspective on it. If you just focus on the details, on the immediate cause for concern, then it just might be impossible to come to a resolution. But if you can look at things from a wider view, which Jupiter wants to do, it likes to expand its position. And so if you can perhaps get some height, not be caught up in in factual arguments, then maybe that's a way to resolve matters, the way to be able to communicate freely, but also, not to alienate people. I mean, it is possible, and in order to do that, you can't work at ground level. Yeah, you do need height, and you need maybe some sort of philosophical or spiritual distance from what you're arguing about, what you're discussing, what you want to what you want to manifest. And just don't forget that the main aspect of the day is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. It is a very argumentative conjunction, and I kind of think that the heliocentric chart indicates that potential for argument with that Mercury opposition Venus, but it also highlights the resolution, and the resolution is about moving beyond the subject matter of the discussion. If you just focus on the facts, well, it's going to be very difficult to move on. So now it's time to look at things from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, November the 12th, 2025. Aries, you're feeling okay. I mean, it's not a bad day, and I think it's a day when you may feel that you really can express yourself. You don't have to worry. It's okay to be open. I mean, after all, Mercury is making a conjunction to Mars, and you might say that with Mercury conjunct Mars, Mercury is telling you about the nature of Mars, and how do you assert yourself? What methods do you use to get people to pay attention to you? And of course, it's words, and you have, I think, a natural facility of words. With words, you can use them. They can be, if you like, your weapon. It's not necessarily about actions. It is about what you say, and the right words, carefully crafted, can be as good as any physical action. But if you are talking a lot, do think about what you are talking about. Remember, Mars is in Sagittarius and Mercury is in Sagittarius as well, and you have to use Sagittarius, in the best possible way. And Sagittarius is a sign which is free thinking, and it does want to go beyond the situation. And you're not just using words as a way to score points. You're using words as a way to find out the truth of the matter. Maybe with Mercury-Mars conjunction, with this Mercury-Mars conjunction, you have an opportunity to ask important questions that you need the answer for. It's not that you need the answer because you're trying to get the better of someone. It's because you genuinely want the knowledge. So think about your motivations, and if you have the knowledge, that just makes it so much easier for you. And also, we have got a last quarter moon, and the sun is in Scorpio, and the moon is in Leo. And so with this last quarter moon, it's possible that your natural impulse, with the sun in Scorpio, is to make things more serious than they actually have to be. And the challenge is to take something which seems to be serious, which might be no laughing matter, but to change it, to recast it, and perhaps to see the humor with it there, or to see the creative potential. Because if something is important to you, it needn't be a grim struggle. It can be a source of progress, and even a source of joy. And so that that might be a way in which you can utilize this last quarter moon. And it might also be that you've been trying to resolve something, you've been trying to get something out into the open, and maybe you succeed, and it just needs that final push. So overall, Aries, I think that it's not a bad day. I think that you've got a lot to say for yourself, but you do have to get some perspective, and you have to not get caught on things which might be relatively trivial. It's easy to get angry, and once you get angry, you slow down and you start focusing on the wrong things, and you get sort of bogged down, and that's never a good situation for an Aries to be. You must always be looking for that broader perspective, and that's the whole point. That's what you're trying to achieve. Taurus. Still, Taurus, you are not entirely convinced by anything. Certainly you're not convinced by anything that other people is offering, promising, claiming. In a way, you're quite suspicious. You kind of trust yourself, but can you trust anyone else? And can you be tempted to do something you weren't planning on doing? And if you have a plan for the day, you have an idea about how the day should unfold, then you're probably inclined to follow that plan and not be tempted off course. Now, one thing we do have today is a last quarter moon, and this last quarter moon, it could be challenging, and it might be a reminder perhaps of what you're not doing, what you're not getting together. And it could have a relationship dimension. Don't forget that the sun is still in Scorpio. The sun is actually moving into the last decanate of Scorpio, and with this movement, with moon making a square to the sun, there may be one particular relationship that in some way could be troubling. It's kind of disturbing, maybe, or you're wondering how it sits with your own need for security. I mean, security does matter for every Taurus, but particularly now, with the moon in Leo. And so maybe you have to work with it, and perhaps recognize that in some respects your security is in the hands of another person. I mean, not fully, but if you can have the right relationship with the right person, that can actually make you feel more comfortable, even though it might not feel like that to begin with. And at the same time, Taurus, don't underestimate your ability to get on with people. I think that through your words, you can attract people's attention, and you can find new ways of relating. So the way you speak, does matter, and you have to perhaps negotiate, what other people are saying. When you hear what people have to say, when you hear people's viewpoint, your first instincts may not be particularly positive. After all, there is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars, and this Mercury-Mars conjunction might manifest as someone else having a lot to say, and you, to begin with, being overwhelmed by what they have to say, or perhaps you don't like what someone else has to say. But I don't think you should allow the content of people's words to upset you. The point is, people are talking, and if people are talking, that means they have the expectation they will be listened to, and also they want a response. And if someone wants a response, then that in itself is a social act. And, if you give people a response, even if you disagree with them, then I think, in the end, the results, could be quite fortunate. Now, continuing with the relationship theme, well, I can't help but notice that Venus is conjunct true black moon Lilith. So you've got Venus in Scorpio in your opposite sign, conjunct true black moon Lilith. And so that conjunction might, at its worst, be about your own feelings of resentment. There may be certain people you do resent, even if you care about them a great deal. You could still resent some aspect of them, and in relationships, that black moon Lilith could just manifest. And because true black moon Lilith is in the 7th, it kind of has a shadow property. It might represent an aspect of yourself that you don't fully recognize. It's something, perhaps quite hidden. Lilith is something that, is on the fringes. Maybe something that occupies that territory between, the conscious and the unconscious. When you're dreaming, when you're half dreaming, it's kind of there, but you don't fully own it. And if you don't fully own it, of course, it could be pushed onto another person. And so, do think about other people. And if you find yourself having an extreme reaction to another person, then consider the possibility that it really might be connected with Venus conjunct true black moon Lilith. And what you're really dealing with is some aspect of yourself that you're not fully able to recognize. And so you might indeed be projecting it. But that is a negative way of looking at it. I mean, there is a positive way, because true black moon Lilith could be regarded as your power. And talking about power, Venus is at 7 degrees Scorpio. So, you might be thinking, well, so what if Venus is at 7 degrees Scorpio? Well, that might be relevant, because between Venus, when it's between 7 degrees Scorpio and 11 degrees Scorpio, is in its own terms. So it's got a minor dignity between 7 and 11 Scorpio. And so, we think about Venus and Scorpio as being unfortunate, as being in its detriment, but it is in a particular part of Scorpio where it actually has dignity. And the fact that it's Venus and true black moon Lilith come together, at around 7 degrees Scorpio, perhaps indicates that we're dealing with your power. Lilith does represent some secret aspect of your power, and you perhaps have a chance to integrate it, and you can be helped to integrate it through your contacts with other people. It's almost like you need to see your own Lilith reflected in another person, and you see the reflection, and then you can reabsorb it. I know it sounds a bit sort of Star Trek-y, absorbing things, reabsorbing things, like some sort of alien from an alien planet, which is causing trouble. But Lilith, Lilith might seem to be an alien, but in fact it's an integral part of you, and it's an integral part of your strength. And the fact that this Venus true black moon Lilith interplay is happening at 7 degrees Scorpio, where Venus is moving into its own terms, that is, using the Egyptian terms rather than the Chaldean terms. I'm not quite sure where the Chaldean terms start. It's a technical matter. I wouldn't worry about it too much, but still, the point is, Venus is getting stronger. Venus is your ruler, and I think that somehow this black moon Lilith is helping. Gemini. Well, Gemini, I'm not saying that today need be dramatic, but it might be dramatic, and it depends to an extent on how you deal with this conjunction between Mercury and Mars. I have been talking about this conjunction between Mercury and Mars a lot. They've just been getting closer and closer, and now it's exact. Remember, Mercury is your ruler. It's retrograde. It's in Sagittarius, the sign of its detriment, and it is conjunct Mars, which is, well, you could say that Mars is a lesser malefic. It's not necessarily a fortunate planet from Mercury's viewpoint. So it's possible, Gemini, that there are things out there that make you angry. You might just be angry just because you're angry. And if you're feeling angry, then you might want to express this anger. Maybe the Mercury-Mars conjunction can make Geminis angry. And so if there's something annoying you, I think it's important that you recognize it. Sometimes Geminis can claim that they're not angry at all, that everything's fine. But maybe deep down there is something bothering you. And if something is bothering you, then it's possible that other people will pick up on it. You might think that you're keeping it to yourself, but to what extent can you keep it to yourself? So that is one way in which the Mercury-Mars conjunction is working. And maybe if something does annoy you, perhaps you should be honest about it. And the sooner you're honest about it, the better, because if you start talking about what annoys you and someone else is listening, it kind of diffuses the situation. Whereas if you don't discuss things and you just keep them to yourself, they could just sort of build up. Now, because this Mercury-Mars conjunction is in Sagittarius, your opposite sign, there is a sense in which it might be projected. You not being able to recognize your own feelings and pushing those feelings onto other people. So because you don't recognize your own anger, you see other people being angry, you see other people appearing to be hasty, inconsiderate, rude, and that annoys you, and you might sort of react to it. So as far as relationships are concerned, try to be open and honest, honest with yourself, and be honest, about, your own faults, and try not to keep things to yourself, because I think if you do keep things to yourself, they could just sort of get out of control. So that is a negative way of looking at Mercury conjunct Mars. Now there is a positive way. Geminis can be inclined to just exist in their heads. There is no action. It's all about thoughts. It's about ideas. And with Mercury conjunct Mars, maybe you have a chance to do something. Maybe to do something dramatic, but hopefully not dangerous. Just this is perhaps a time to be considering taking an initiative. Of course, you also have to be aware that Mercury is retrograde. The moon is waning. It's a last quarter moon. So on the face of it, it's not a great time to be starting things, but maybe it is possible if you see the right opportunity. But I think you still, to an extent, do have to be careful, and you have to consider, what is possible and what is reasonable. And in that sense, Gemini, I think that you will have a good understanding of convention. Conventions do matter. Everyone has a set of rules. We all have our own sets of rules, and if people break those rules, we get upset. And I think at the moment, Gemini, you understand your own rules, and I think you're probably quite good at communicating, what is important to you, how you want people to behave, and also you understand other people's rules. And so if you are somewhere where you're not in full control, you're on someone else's property, or you're in their space, whatever that space means, you will behave accordingly, or at least you have the capacity to behave accordingly, because I think you just have a good understanding of each person's individual set of conventions, what they'll put up with, and what they'll also be offended about. So you have that capacity to be reasonable and to be law abiding, and even to be able to tell other people what's right and wrong. And deep down, you do have a sense of what's right and wrong. Not necessarily in a completely moral way, but certainly in a legal way. So that's another side to what is going on. But I do think that the key thing, as far as today is concerned, is to be able to harness that Mercury-Mars conjunction. It is really a very high energy conjunction. It could be dangerous. Mars is involved, and if you get swept up in things, perhaps get swept up in your own emotions, in your own anger, then things could go wrong. On the other hand, if you can be rational, if you can be a Gemini is a rational sign, you can also, and if you can also be assertive, but you have to be assertive in a thoughtful way. It's not just being rash, not thinking things through. So it's all about that Mercury-Mars conjunction, and if you can utilize it, rather than be overwhelmed by it, then I think that it can be a day when you can assert yourself reasonably well without getting into too much trouble. Cancer. The moon is still going through Leo. Okay, it might go into Virgo towards the end of the day, depending on where you are. Certainly if you're in the Americas, by this evening, the moon will be out of Leo into Virgo, and I think probably that's going to be a bit of a relief. I mean, the moon works quite well in Virgo, so if you are in the Americas, then this evening things might just feel just easier, and there'll be sort of less stress, less tension, and it's probably going to be in general more straightforward. And as far as the main aspect of the day, well, you could say that it's moon square Uranus, the moon in late Leo making a square to Uranus, and this Leo to Taurus square has only just started to reoccur. By that I mean that Uranus has been in Gemini since the beginning of July, and so when you had a moon square Uranus, the moon would be in either Pisces or Virgo. But now that the Uranus has gone back into Taurus, that square happens with the moon in Leo. And so as far as what this moon might be about, I mean, it could be about money. I mean, Leo is the sign following Cancer, and so things relating to money could be a source of irritation. It might be just you just getting annoyed about having to spend money. It may not have anything to do with other people. It just may be that you want to hang on to every penny you've got, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that kind of approach. And Cancerians tend to be very aware of money and the passing of money, and who's getting the money, whether you're getting the money, whether someone else is, and how much money you've got. Even if you don't know for sure how much money you've got, at a sort of emotional level, you kind of always know. I mean, that is perhaps the nature of being a Cancerian. And so, this moon square moon square Uranus could just represent, an irritation, and it might be an irritation relating to other people's behavior. People behaving in a way that you don't appreciate, or even people might be suggesting things that you find to be, not very sensible. And so, that could spoil your peace of mind to some extent. And, at the same time, Cancer, I think you're going to want to get things right. There is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars in Sagittarius. And, this Mercury-Mars conjunction, well, it's got to happen somewhere. I mean, all of us are going to be affected by this Mercury-Mars conjunction. And as far as, you are concerned, your sense of detail might be stronger than usual. And if something isn't done right, you'll be quick to notice and perhaps quick to complain. But it could be that your own high standards relate to yourself. So it may not be about complaining about other people. It might be complaining to yourself about yourself because you have high standards and you're going to want things to be right. And it's going to be difficult for things to be absolutely right. Let's not forget that Mercury is retrograde. And, with Mercury retrograde, just things can happen. And, however carefully you plan things, things can still, go slightly wrong. And, you can try to sort them out. But, when you sort one thing out, then you have to sort something else out. And maybe it's just good enough to try your best. And don't get overly obsessed about anything because, I don't think it's worth it. And, as far as the positives, we should always be looking at the positives. What is the best thing going on right now? I've mentioned the fact the moon goes into Virgo this evening. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon will not go into Virgo this evening. In fact, it won't go into Virgo if you're in Paris, for example. And if you're in London, the moon will be in Virgo for 8 minutes because the moon goes into Virgo at sort of 8 minutes to midnight, which doesn't really count as the moon being in Virgo. But I think that the most positive thing going on right now is still that Jupiter-Saturn trine. I talked about that Jupiter-Saturn trine yesterday, when it really was close, when Jupiter was stationary retrograde. Now, Jupiter is still stationary retrograde. That trine between Jupiter and Saturn is still close, still less than a quarter of a degree. So Jupiter is in your sign. Saturn is making a trine to Jupiter, and this does enable you to get things together. And it can be quite a disciplined trine, but not an obsessively disciplined trine. I've already suggested that maybe you're going to get overwhelmed by detail. There's a possibility that you're going to be overwhelmed by detail, perhaps because you're not thinking. And if you think and you are able to transcend, I mean, I'm not saying transcend necessarily in a spiritual way, but if you can just move beyond the details, and that's what Jupiter trine Saturn is trying to get you to do. Jupiter and Saturn are the rulers of time, and maybe you have to understand the time in which you're living and what is expected of you right now. And there are things that are expected of you, but perfection is not one of those things. You just are required to do a good job, and I think this is certainly something you can do. And in the process, just try to see the whole. Don't just get caught up on part of a picture. You need to see the whole picture, and then you can see that you're really on the right track. And Saturn might reflect another person, someone who could be useful, who can really help you to make the most of everything. And you have of course got so much to contribute, especially now with Jupiter still moving through your sign, and the fact that it's retrograde, really shouldn't bother you at all, because with Jupiter retrograde, it just means that you get another chance. And Jupiter, don't forget, Jupiter in some respects is a ruler of Cancer, because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So with Jupiter retrograde, you you get things again. You get another chance. If you've missed an opportunity over the last few months, perhaps since the early summer, it can all come back to you. And so I think that that Cancer is really a good reason to be very optimistic. Leo, well, the moon is still in Leo. It is in late Leo, and it does move into Virgo this evening if you're in the Americas, but that's right at the end of the day. And if you're not in the Americas, you've pretty much got moon in Leo all day long. And so with the moon in Leo, it is making a square to the sun, and it is making a square to Uranus. And this square to Uranus, certainly on the surface, sounds like a problem. I mean, and you might think that relates to sort of instability. And this is kind of the first moon square Uranus you've had for quite a few months, which hits your sign, because Uranus has been in Gemini since the beginning of July. So moon made the square to Uranus, in Virgo, not in Leo. But now that Uranus has gone back into Taurus, moon in Leo does indeed make a square to Uranus. And this might be the first time that you recognize that Uranus really has gone back into Taurus. And I think that Uranus going back into Taurus is good, because it just gives you a chance to go back to some of the changes you were trying to make since 2018, because that's when Uranus went into Taurus. And from a Leo perspective, Uranus could have shaken things up, may not always have been easy, but you perhaps saw what you could do. You saw that you could be original. You didn't have to take things at face value, and you could shake things up and really be someone who was a mover, the person who initiates. And it may be that over the last few months you've kind of forgotten about that. You thought that it was all done. You tried your hardest to be original. You may or may not have succeeded. You created change, hopefully. Maybe you didn't create change. Maybe you've got regrets. Maybe you feel you could have done more. But with this moon square Uranus, now you can realize, in fact, you have another chance. You have another chance to create real change. You can move in the direction that you want to go in. And in the process, you can be a real individual. And so I think that this moon square Uranus, while it might be somewhat destabilizing, something might happen that you weren't expecting, you might be a little bit confused, but it's good, because you need some things to be disrupted, because if things are never disrupted, you just go on and on in the same direction, and it all gets boring and you achieve nothing. So Uranus is your friend, and it's a good thing that Uranus has gone back into Taurus. So hopefully you will be able to take full advantage of it. And with the moon in Leo in a fire sign at the same time, we have got Mercury conjunct Mars. And this Mercury conjunct Mars, it's a difficult aspect in some respects. It can create a bit of anger, a bit of turmoil, people having their own opinions, but I don't think you really mind. I think that this Mercury-Mars conjunction, from your perspective, can make you quite a fun person, and I think that your sense of humor will be on good form, and also you're in a position where you can be optimistic and creative, and I think that people will kind of appreciate your presence most of the time. I think you're capable of stirring things up and causing problems and dashing people's expectations in many different ways. You're capable of doing that, but you're also able to make things exciting, and perhaps that's your role. And make the most of your own abilities, but also encourage other people to be themselves and to not to hide and not to feel restricted. So I think that with that positive approach and relishing change and variety, then that is very much the right way to go about things. Virgo. Mercury is finally making the exact conjunction to Mars. And I know I've been sort of going on and on about it, but it matters. I mean, Mercury is your ruler, and this conjunction is taking place in an angular house. It's from a house perspective, you could say that it's taken place in your fourth house, because Sagittarius is the fourth house from Virgo. So if you've got a Mercury-Mars conjunction in the fourth house, you might say that says something about your home and your family and what it means to be in a stable situation. Even if you're not in a stable situation, you kind of know what stability is all about. And Mercury-Mars is certainly an energetic aspect. You want to make things happen. If you're not happy with the way things are, if you're not happy with your little part of the world, you want to change it. And I think perhaps you can change it, but you don't want to just change it for the sake of it. I mean, there could be some danger here with Mercury-Mars, that you just get annoyed about small things, and you don't really know when to stop, and it might be difficult to be satisfied, and you just always something. And Virgo, you need to recognize that perfection is frankly impossible. You can't get things absolutely right, although it is a real possibility that this Mercury-Mars conjunction might make you rather obsessive, just focusing on things in just too much detail, and I just don't think that would be necessary. Additionally, if you bring too much energy to bear, especially at home, you might cause damage. You might break things. I mean, it is possible. So if you're around the home, just don't take anything too seriously. And if something is in need of repair, or you're trying to do something you don't fully understand, perhaps it's some kind of household equipment or machinery, and don't feel that you have to sort it out straight away. And home repairs, DIY, that kind of thing, maybe that can be left until later. And and of course, when you are in one place with that Mercury-Mars conjunction, the pressure might just naturally start to rise, and almost like you're cooking. You're like a pressure cooker, and what you kind of need is a little bit of variety. Don't forget that Mercury is in Sagittarius. Mercury needs variety. You need variety, and so a change of scene, if you can possibly manage it, over the course of a day, would, I think, be a very good idea. And as far as other things are concerned, well, if you're in the Americas, then this evening there could be a change, because the moon moves out of Leo and into Virgo. So this movement of the moon, into your sign this evening. In Americas, if you're not in the Americas, then it's really, the moon is going to be in Leo, all day long. But in the Americas, you might see a change. Things might become easier, and additionally, solutions might come to you. Maybe you'd been trying to work something out. You've been trying to get something perfect, and you hadn't got it. And when the moon moves into Virgo, you you get a perspective, and you understand what you can do, and and also with the moon moving into Virgo, there's a greater sense of what makes you healthy or what makes you feel good, and what should be avoided. Now, if you're not in the Americas, and the moon will move into Virgo tomorrow. In fact, if you're in the UK, then the last 8 minutes of the day has the moon in the Virgo, so you will be able to appreciate that. So it's something to perhaps savor if you're a night owl. So that's that's a broad picture. We also got a last quarter moon. So last quarter moon, we've got the moon in Leo square the sun in Scorpio. And I think that this moon in Leo square the sun in Scorpio, there might be the question of what needs to be revealed. When you're talking about a last quarter moon, it's perhaps the last chance to do something before the lunar cycle ends. And at the end of the lunar cycle, in a week's time, we've got a new moon in late Scorpio. I think it's around November the 20th, the new moon. And so you've got a week left, and it might be that there's just something that needs to be revealed, something that needs to be said. You don't necessarily want to say it, and you're concerned perhaps if you give too much away, you might be compromising yourself. And it seems that there are some things you should keep to yourself, but not everything. And so perhaps with this last quarter moon, something needs to be brought to the surface, something needs to be explained. Perhaps a precious secret needs to be revealed, although to the right person. It's not a time to be telling the whole world what's on your mind. Libra. Venus is interesting. I've talked about Venus, and I've said that Venus is not well placed. Venus is in Scorpio, in the sign of its detriment, and of course that impacts you because Venus is your ruler. But if we're talking about dignity, dignity takes many forms in astrology. We think about signs and exaltations and triplicities, which is elements, but you've got a minor dignity. You've got the terms, and in particular, you have got the Egyptian terms. I mean, there are two types of terms. There's the Chaldean terms and the Egyptian terms. And if we follow the Egyptian terms, the part of Scorpio between 7 degrees and 11 degrees is ruled by Venus. So Venus is moving into its own terms today. And that means over the next couple of days, Venus has real dignity. So if you have felt yourself to be somehow weak, not fully able to assert yourself, well, things are changing. And while Venus is in its own terms, you perhaps feel more comfortable and better able to make things happen. And while this is happening, Venus is conjunct true black moon Lilith. So you've got true black moon Lilith at around 7 degrees Scorpio. You've got Venus at 7 degrees Scorpio. And maybe true black moon Lilith is your friend. I mean, so true black moon Lilith represents, well, something that's very personal to you, but something that you don't always recognize. You don't necessarily always want to credit. I mean, it might be something that you don't want to talk about, that you might regard it as being dangerous, but it is an essential part of you, and it's a part of your power. And so perhaps, Libra, you need to take something that you are not fully comfortable with and make it just part of you, make it your friend, and be ready to use your power. And power sometimes might feel like you're doing something. When you're exercising power, you may feel you're doing something dangerous, something almost forbidden. But it is the right time to be doing that because of this true Black Moon Lilith. And the more you recognize true Black Moon Lilith, you almost sort of recognize your own darkness. The more true Black Moon Lilith will work on your side, in your favor, rather than against you. So in your own quiet way, Libra, you can be quite powerful. You can get what you want. You could say that you could be quite grasping, but sometimes it's okay to be grasping. Some things belong to you, and if something does belong to you, and perhaps it's been taken from you, it's been denied you, then Libra, now might actually be your chance to get hold of it. And I don't think that you need to feel at all guilty about it. And additionally, you can be very clear about how you want things to be. There is a Mercury-Mars conjunction, and this Mercury-Mars conjunction that says something about you explaining what you want in a way that is very clear. There's no pretense. There's not much subtlety. But if you are open and honest, I think that you will be understood. Okay, you might not always be appreciated, but the key thing is the results. And I think at the moment you are in a position to be able to actually get the results you're looking for. And don't forget that Jupiter is making a trine to Saturn. Still, Jupiter trine Saturn is an aspect I was talking about yesterday, and this Jupiter trine Saturn is a fortunate aspect. Jupiter's in Cancer. Jupiter might be going retrograde, but this Jupiter trine Saturn just enables you to get yourself together, to align yourself to the times in which you are living. And you can do that very well. And you can organize yourself in such a way that it is absolutely clear that you are in the right place, that you're doing things right. And if you're in accord with your environment, if you're in accord with the times, after all, Jupiter and Saturn are the great chronocrators. They're the rulers of time. Then I don't think that very much can go wrong. Scorpio. Venus is making a conjunction to true Black Moon Lilith. It's interesting, isn't it? I should have mentioned this conjunction between true Black Moon Lilith and Venus at the beginning of this video, but I sort of didn't notice it, or I'd sort of forgotten about it. Well, I think I didn't notice it, to be honest. I can't notice everything, but now it's very clear, and it's a very exact aspect between Venus and true Black Moon Lilith. And this aspect may say something about how you present yourself. It is Venus and true Black Moon Lilith are, after all, in Scorpio, and so you can present yourself, extremely well, and it's a presentation that is unusual. It may be ever so slightly unsettling, but sometimes it's good if other people are unsettled. If you are behaving in a way which is completely predictable, that's no good, is it? That's not what you want. You really want to show the world that you are different, and you additionally don't want people to be too easy, to be too comfortable. If people are too comfortable, then maybe they take you for granted and they don't regard you as being particularly special. But if you are ever so slightly disturbing, and they're thinking, who are you? What might you do? You might come over as being just ever so slightly dangerous, and maybe that's a good thing to come over as being dangerous. That means that people don't want to get on your wrong side. And while this is happening, we have a last quarter moon. So the moon is in Leo, the sun is in Scorpio. And, this last quarter moon, it's about the lunar cycle. We had a new moon. Well, we had a new moon. When was it? Sort of October the 22nd, was it? So that's when the lunar cycle started. October the 21st, and so this new moon is coming to an end. There's a week left, and this last quarter moon is a reminder. Now, I think that this last quarter moon does perhaps give a similar message to Venus conjunct true black moon Lilith. It is about your power, and it's about you being able to assert your power while the sun is still in your sign. And the moon is in Leo, and the moon is therefore ruled by the sun. So that really does give you a boost. And so this last quarter moon might be about you being able to really, get what you want, get what you feel is yours. And you might be in a hurry. You might feel that you haven't got all the time in the world, that you can't wait forever, and that now is your moment for making it clear that there are things that you want. And I think, Scorpio, if there is something you want, I don't think that you'll have much difficulty getting it, and you can be verbally very, very clear. There is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. Mercury is a communication planet. It's conjunct Mars, so you are not going to mince your words. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I talked about Venus conjunct true black moon Lilith, and I can look at Venus in several ways. I can see that Venus is something you're trying to present, you're trying to show to the world. That's one way of looking at Venus. It's about how you get on with people, particularly with Venus in Scorpio. But you can also look at Venus as being another person. I mean, Venus rules Taurus, it's your opposite sign. And, Venus, because it's in Scorpio, just maybe represents another person who at some level feels themselves to be quite reliant on you. They're leaning on you. I mean, leaning on you in the sense that they want to stand up. They want to keep upright. If they're not leaning on you, if you walk away, they'll just fall over. I don't mean lean on you as in pressurizing you. And so you're perhaps holding someone up, or someone feels that you're being supportive, and they just gravitate towards you. And perhaps in the past you've seen this person as being quite weak, maybe too weak, but maybe they might show an unexpected strength, an unexpected side to their personality, which you might find interesting. And that's where perhaps the true black moon Lilith comes in. So, just because someone has disappointed you in the recent past, it doesn't mean you should necessarily write them off. And maybe they have got something to offer, if you just give them a chance. Sagittarius. Today, the Mercury-Mars conjunction becomes exact, and it's in your sign. So this Mercury-Mars conjunction, I think, could certainly energize you. I mean, it is in your sign. It's in a fire sign, and obviously Sagittarius is a fire sign, and so you're going to perhaps be quite larger than life. And if there's anything you want to do, want to talk about, suggest, act on, then now might really be your chance. Although you don't want to exaggerate. It's quite a heavy influence, Mercury Mars, in some respects, because it might encourage you to take things too far at many different levels. As a Sagittarius, you have an adventurous spirit, and you always like to take things to the next level, whatever that next level might be. And the sooner you do it, the better. But perhaps you won't think things through. I mean, that is possible. Mercury Mars can be about hastiness, and just the whole way you present yourself. Yeah, you might be exciting, but being exciting can also be exhausting. You can exhaust other people. You can also, exhaust yourself. So, do be careful and show some consideration and sympathy. I mean, Mercury is really in quite a difficult position. And it's retrograde, it's in Sagittarius, a sign of its detriment, and it's conjunct Mars. And Mercury just may represent another person. I mean, I think I've already mentioned this, but who is that other person? How are other people responding to you? It may, as far as you're concerned, be all about you and what you want to do, and that's great. But whatever interaction you have, I mean, it could be a very brief interaction. I don't know, you might buy something in a shop and you have an encounter with the person on the other side of a counter or whatever, and there just may be something about you how you present yourself or what you're asking for just could be a bit too much. And so perhaps a bit of moderation might be a good idea. And being able to see things from another person's perspective, that's always useful. And so it's not necessarily all about you, but it's true that you have a lot of control, you have a lot of power, and it might be that certain people are looking up to you. They're kind of gravitating towards you. And if they're gravitating towards you, gravitating around you, and so, yeah, that does give you responsibility. Maybe people will listen to what you say, regardless of whether it's right or wrong. You're perhaps going to be seen as something of an authority. Do you feel yourself to be an authority? I don't think that you necessarily know all the answers. I mean, you know that. But maybe some people are looking for the answers from you. And, if you're honest, there's a lot you don't understand. I mean, there's a lot that none of us understand. I mean, there's so much to understand, and it's always difficult. But if you look at the chart, we're thinking about you as being Jupiter. I mean, Jupiter's your ruler, and so if we look at Jupiter, there's Jupiter, and there's the Sun. The Sun is starting to make a trine to Jupiter, and there's Neptune. We're kind of getting a bit of a grand trine coming up here. I mean, it doesn't really come together as a grand trine, but you could argue that there's a Sun, Jupiter, Neptune grand trine. And what we do see is that Jupiter is on the Sun-Neptune midpoint. So that might say something about you. What does it mean for Jupiter on the Sun-Neptune midpoint? I mean, my instinctive interpretation of Jupiter on the Sun-Neptune midpoint could be about you maybe getting confused, or there might be some area in your life which you there's a weakness there. You're not always quite as strong as you think you are, as you claim to be. So let's just see what Reinhold Ebertin says in his combination of stellar influences about Jupiter on the Sun-Neptune midpoint. So he says about Jupiter on the Sun-Neptune midpoint, he reckons optimism in spite of little vitality, the capacity to enjoy pleasant things in life in spite of weakness or illness, achievement of success with little exertion. So this aspect is this midpoint is kind of quite interesting. I mean, what Ebertin indicates, I mean, he is the authority on midpoints, so it's certainly his interpretation is a bit more sophisticated than mine. But so he's saying that, maybe at the moment you haven't got quite as much strength as you'd like to have. And, this may mean that you have to sort of conserve your resources. Yet you seem to be quite happy about it. I mean, it is Jupiter on the Sun, Neptune. It's making things perhaps a little bit larger than life, and you are able to certainly look on the bright side. And so that may be how you feel and what you are presenting. I think that Ebertin perhaps should have mentioned that there is a certain deceptive side to this, that you may be kidding yourself about something. I mean, it could be that you are able to be actively deceptive with Jupiter on the Sun, Neptune. If that's what you want to do. So that Sun Neptune midpoint, it does mean that over the course of the day you should, as far as possible, try to conserve your energy. I mean, I've gone on about Mercury-Mars being this, very sort of dynamic aspect, and you've got so much to offer, so much to contribute. You can almost set the world on fire. But there is a limit here because of Jupiter on the Sun, Neptune midpoint. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you can't be everywhere. And you do what you can. But, if you can just recognize those limits, I think that, that would be good. And also, of course, recognize other people's limits. They are, as I've already said, perhaps feeling pressurized. They're not feeling on best form. Although you could say Mercury conjunct Mars might be about a person who is angry. They're annoyed about something, and maybe they're expressing their annoyance. I talked about this before. I'm sorry, I think I'm repeating myself, but I think what I said yesterday was that people who are annoyed are at some level demonstrating their own fundamental weakness. If someone is in a great position, why would they get annoyed? There's no point in expressing that annoyance. So, angry people should perhaps be tolerated. Don't necessarily get angry back. And perhaps if someone is annoyed, you should ask yourself why. What are they making up for? And try to understand other people's weaknesses. Not because you're trying to exploit those weaknesses, but perhaps you're trying, in fact, to, in some ways, heal. I mean, maybe that's something that you can do. And finally, don't forget the moon is changing sign. And this sign change, certainly in Americas, by this evening, the moon will be out of Leo and into Virgo. And so this evening, you might undergo a change if you're in America. I think if you're not in America, it's going to be more about tomorrow. But if you are in America, this evening, things might start to come together. You might become more focused. And right at the end of the day, you might feel there's something that needs to be done. Perhaps relating to your work that you perhaps you'd forgotten and you hadn't got it together, or too many other things to deal with. But by this evening, you finally have a chance to get going on something that you perhaps felt you should have done earlier in the day. So if you get that opportunity, why not just sort it out? And so in fact, you could have quite a successful end to the day. Yeah, especially if you're in the Americas. Capricorn. Well, Capricorn, the moon is still in Leo. I mean, moon in Leo is not really the most exciting place for the moon to be in, all things being equal, from a Capricorn perspective. But it might be a time, Capricorn, where you feel that, there are just things that you need to treat seriously. They might not necessarily be anything practical, but just maybe it's just emotional, something you regard as being heavy, and something that just needs to be resolved in its own way, with as little drama as possible. And the moon in Capricorn is the moon in Leo. It does make a square to Uranus, and so moon square Uranus that that is a potentially quite difficult aspect, and you know that things are potentially dangerous, potentially complicated, and that's one reason why you just want to take things easy. You don't want to do anything that involves risk. I mean, at some level, you would like to take action. There is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars in Sagittarius, and this Mercury-Mars conjunction, might stir you up, might make you feel that there should be something you should do, something. But if you really plan it, you think about it, you'll realize that really there's nothing much you can do, nothing much you should do. I mean, why? Why be in a hurry? Get your timing right. And, at the same time, Capricorn, you may be of the view that, the world around you is difficult, that nothing is necessarily going to be particularly easy, that everything might be a struggle. So again, why make the effort? It just might be best to just leave it. Now, I'm absolutely not saying it's going to be a bad day, by the way. I mean, it is just another day, but it's a day, at least for most of the day, probably all of the day, if you're outside the Americas, when you just want to just not take risks, and also at the same time, you're very aware of where the complications are. And I think that's important, because some people are naive and they think that everything is straightforward and they can just sail through, but not you. You see where the difficulties lie, and it can be an advantage. It can be a real advantage, seeing where the difficulties lie, seeing where you have to cover yourself, and because you know where to cover yourself, you're going to make sure that you are protected. And perhaps in this way you can take advantage of the fact that Venus is conjunct true black moon Lilith. Venus is relevant to you, and Venus kind of represents what you're trying to get together, and at the same time you can see what's going to go wrong, or rather you can see what could go wrong, and you're able to kind of fast forward into the future and create possibilities in your head, possibilities, of things going wrong. And then that means that today you can take protective action. So you are looking after yourself. Maybe other people aren't. People seem to think that everything's going to be fine, but as far as you're concerned, it's not necessarily going to be fine. Now, if you are in Americas, this evening, the moon changes sign. In fact, it could be earlier than this evening. It could be this afternoon. So let's see, when would that be? So, for example, if you're in California, the moon moves into Virgo at, I think it's 8 minutes to 4 in the afternoon. So in that last third of the day, if you're in California, if you're in New York, then that would be 3 hours earlier. So that would be 10 to 7, something like that, in the evening. So if you're in the Americas, with the moon moving into Virgo late in the day, it suddenly feels better. Something you were worrying about, something that was bothering you, suddenly makes more sense, and it doesn't feel quite so heavy. And you can be more easygoing about it, and also more imaginative. Imagination starts perhaps with fear. You fear the unknown. Then perhaps you get used to the fear, and then you realize that it's okay. You can take that next step forward. And so by late this afternoon or this evening in the Americas, then I think that you can start to just feel better, and you can start to plan the next stage. And I think there is sort of greater optimism, by the end of the day. Now, if you're not in the Americas, don't worry. The moon will move into Virgo tomorrow. In fact, if you're in the UK, the moon does move into Virgo today, but Wednesday, but very late, at 8 minutes to midnight. Aquarius. Venus is making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith. I've got to mention that. Venus is in Scorpio, and Venus is looking better. I think it's been difficult with Venus moving into Scorpio, getting used to Venus being in Scorpio, and with you and Venus in Scorpio, I know that Venus isn't your ruler, but Venus is in quite a high-profile part of your chart, and with Venus in Scorpio for you, Aquarius, perhaps it has been about how you appear, your presence, what kind of image you want to present. And with Venus conjunct true black moon Lilith, there might be something worrying about you, but kind of worrying in a way that works in your favor, because that black moon Lilith energy is there, and true black moon Lilith is a point of power, and so the way you present yourself can make people nervous, but at the same time they do know that you're serious. And it's not just that Venus is conjunct true black moon Lilith. We also have a last quarter moon with moon in Leo in your opposite sign. Yeah, this is a time when relationships can't be entirely ignored, but then the moon is square the sun, and so that moon square sun represents an overall uneasiness, but an uneasiness, Aquarius, that you're somehow aware of, you're somehow familiar with, you know how it all works. And if you just keep that in mind, then possibly you can take advantage of other people's confusion and uncertainty. And I'm not suggesting you take advantage of it in such a way that anyone gets damaged. That's not what it's about. But it's also important that you have full control, and that you're able to make the most of whatever power you have. And I think that's something you very much can do today. And I think that with the moon in Leo and your opposite sign, it's a good opportunity to understand what makes other people tick, to understand other people's worries and concerns. And you can do what you like with that information. If you understand someone's worries and concerns, perhaps you can make them feel better, or perhaps you're just aware of your own strength vis-a-vis other people, and you perhaps see that in actual fact you've got considerable advantages, and maybe in the past you've taken these advantages for granted, but there's no need to take them for granted. They are real, and if you take them for granted, well, that's a waste, isn't it? So use the power that you have, and I think that you will be well pleased with the results. And just don't forget the human dimension, don't forget your responsibility to other people, because you may come over as being a powerful person, and a person who could at some level be a bit difficult to deal with, and maybe just by putting people at their ease, that gives you a further advantage. Pisces. A key question, Pisces, is how much strength have you got? How many resources have you got left? And are you able to do everything that you want to do? You obviously need to be ambitious, and I'm confident that you can accomplish a fair amount, but there is a point where you have to say enough is enough. And there is some evidence, Pisces, that there may be moments in the day when you just feel that you've just gone too far. You can see the path ahead. You can see what you can do, what you could do in a perfect world, but the world is not perfect, and that if you just try to do everything, well, then you might fall short. So it might be a good idea, Pisces, if you limit yourself. You decide what is important, where you're going to make the most gains, and really focus your energy on that, and not feel that you have to do everything at once. Now, one aspect today which I think is important is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. This conjunction between Mercury and Mars has been building up, and now sort of today it's exact. It's in Sagittarius. It has a high profile, and I think that from your perspective, Pisces, it feels as if there's really just something you want to do, and if you can't do it, you're going to feel very annoyed with yourself. There is this agitation here. I mean, and agitation sounds bad, but agitation can be a good thing. If we're never agitated, if we're never nervous, then we're not going to get anywhere, because we'll just be complacent. And you are not complacent. You are aware that there are things that need to be done, and they need to be done as soon as possible. And if anyone gets in your way, you're not going to be particularly tolerant. You might be inclined to want to just roll over them. You're just not in that mood, that kind of mood. But persuasion can go a long way, and I think that at the moment you can be persuasive, and if something matters to you, then you can give it your best shot. But again, don't think you can be in all places at once. And in many respects, it's your optimism that's going to see you through, and even when you are flagging. So at the beginning of the day, decide what's necessary and just focus on that. And if things are just of minor importance, you can probably leave them until later. And at the same time, we've got a sort of last quarter moon, moon in Leo, square the sun in Scorpio. And this last quarter moon, it could be about urgency. I'm not saying you need to feel that everything is urgent, but if you feel urgency, then it's important that you keep your cool, doing things step by step in an efficient way. And I think you can be very efficient right now, perhaps because you haven't got all the energy in the world. So when you've reached that stage, you do things correctly. I think it's like if your car is running out of gas, that you know that you can just about get to your destination, then you moderate your speed. And wasn't it? I think there's an optimum speed. Is it 50 miles an hour, something like that, provided you're not going over the speed limit. But there's always an optimum way of doing things when you're running low, when you haven't got as much energy as you'd like to have. And because of that discipline and that control, that's really going to help you, and it will help you get what you need, and perhaps to satisfy some of the concerns you're feeling with this last quarter moon, feeling that it's going to be a new moon soon, the lunar cycle's going to be over. Have you really accomplished what you need to accomplish? And I think you've definitely got what it takes, but don't overestimate things. You do have to be, I think, very efficient. But I think you can be efficient. Don't worry about it. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to turn to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 9. the taming power of the small. And the taming power of the small is asking us to be reasonable. We can't accomplish great things today, and it tells us, dense clouds, no rain. The clouds seem to promise rain. There seems to be that possibility, but the rains don't arrive, and so we might be waiting for some big opportunity, but we might be sort of waiting in vain. And also, we need to show some self-discipline. That does matter. Taming power of a small, left to our own devices, if we don't have any discipline, we could get involved in this, we can get involved in that. Kind of Mercury-Mars conjunction in Sagittarius at its worst. So if you think about Mercury-Mars conjunction in Sagittarius, it's not a very restful aspect. It's always wanting to do something, like Mercury, the mind, thinking about this and that and wanting to move from one place to another, thoughts going all over the place, no discipline, particularly as that Mercury-Mars conjunction is in Sagittarius. And so we need to exercise discipline, and we can exercise discipline. And we have two moving lines. The bottom line moves and the fourth from the bottom moves. And with the bottom line moving, this indicates that at quite an early stage in our activities today, we hit a block. It's not a devastating block, but it's just a block. It's almost like before we've even started, almost. And we hit a block and we realize straight away that it's just too much for us. Maybe our timing is wrong, but we're not strong enough right now. We might be strong enough tomorrow. We might be strong enough in a few hours' time. But whatever it is, we stop and we go back. And it's okay. It's not a humiliation. It's not an embarrassment. And because it's happening at an early stage, no harm is done. And so it's okay to stop before you even start. Absolutely okay. Then we get the fourth line moving. And, with the fourth line moving, it is more active than the first line. And, the key point about the fourth line is making sure that we act in a way that has complete integrity. And it's a situation where we're looking for the truth about ourselves and the truth about the situation. And if we've got both, if we've understood both, we're going to be fine. And we can act not out of selfishness, but we can act in the sort of the common good, knowing that we're doing the right thing. So in the end, we can do something useful. And, we shouldn't expect huge results. We shouldn't necessarily expect massive amounts of praise. We can just do what we can, do what we're good at, and not perhaps think beyond the situation. Now, got two lines moving, and that does mean that we move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 44. And this hexagram coming to meet indicates that, in the end, we might get ourselves into a situation that possibly we don't really want to be involved with. And it might relate to being involved with another person, coming to meet. And, coming to meet represents a person who, if we're not careful, you could just tie us up in knots. They could take up a lot of time, and they might be quite manipulative. They might seem harmless, but when you spend time with them, the problems start to mount. And in fact, we could lose our freedom of action. So don't spend too much time with another person. Even if your efforts, what I've talked about with the previous hexagram, did meet some success, you might get praise, you might get a lot of praise, from one source. But maybe that's praise that is a warning sign. If someone is too generous, is too gushing, maybe they should be avoided. And we have to think about the situation, and we must, as far as we can, maintain our freedom. And if we spend too much time with another person, if we spend too long listening to another person, at some stage in the day, we might find that our freedom just gets marginalized. We don't have anything left. So other people might be there, but we don't want to get too close to them. So I think a bit of detachment might be a good thing. So now I want to look at the astrology, and the first thing I want to look at before looking at the BBC is the conjunction between Mercury and Mars. So today we definitely have a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. So let's look at the chart for this. So here it is. Here's the Mercury-Mars conjunction, which I've spent so long talking about in this video. So this conjunction happens at 11:15 this evening, London time. So it sort of happens in the afternoon, sort of, if you're in the Americas, and it would of course happen tomorrow, Thursday, if you're in Australia or New Zealand. And so here's the Mercury-Mars conjunction at 6 degrees for Sagittarius. And, this conjunction is potentially difficult simply because Mercury is not in a great position. Mercury is, it's retrograde. It's in its detriment. It's conjunct Mars. And, Mercury is about how we think, and there could be a lot of mental action, maybe mental angst as well, thinking about something again and again and again. It goes round and round in our heads, and we're not necessarily happy about that. And it might be difficult to be happy, and we might put just a lot of energy into things without many results. And Mercury is a planet that is the planet of communication. So of course Mercury conjunct Mars may certainly say something about how we communicate, and we might communicate perhaps without thinking. That's Mercury in Sagittarius. Just whatever comes to mind, got to do something. And it's kind of interesting that this Mercury-Mars conjunction happens so close to a Moon-Uranus square. So, the Moon-Uranus square, Greenwich Mean Time is at 23:29 in the evening, 11:29 this evening. And the Mercury-Mars conjunction is, I think, just 14 minutes before. So the Moon... at 11:15 p.m. So the Moon square Mercury and Mercury square Mars, they're just 14 minutes apart. And I do think that Moon square Uranus is an accelerant. It really makes that Mercury Mars conjunction all the more powerful. So it could be that there is real drama connected with it. I mean, I know that when we talk about Mercury conjunct Mars, we think about the verbal aspect of things. I mean, it can be explosive. We can see big events taking place with Mercury conjunct Mars, and these events, particularly of humans being hasty, humans wanting to make things happen. I mean, I don't want to go into Mercury-Mars conjunction and examples of Mercury-Mars conjunction, because I think I did it very recently, but if I remember rightly, the mine at Messines during the First World War, when the British they dug a tunnel and other Allied troops. They dug a tunnel under the German trenches and blew it up, and I think 10,000 Germans were killed. The largest loss of life in any sort of non-nuclear explosion, in any single non-nuclear explosion, I think. So that could be that could be how the Mercury-Mars conjunction works. There was also, I think, a mining accident in New Zealand. Is it the Pike River mining accident? Happened at the time of a Mercury-Mars conjunction. So there is a real danger to Mercury-Mars, but it's it's a fairly short-lived aspect. But it is just exceptional how bad in theory Mercury is because it's just got three things against it. It's retrograde in a sign of its detriment, and it's conjunct Mars. So as far as what we should do with the Mercury-Mars conjunction, I just think it's important to keep cool. Don't do anything dramatic. Don't do anything dangerous. Be careful what you say. The usual warnings, and I think particularly being careful what we say. And we should also be aware of how we respond to what other people say. We might jump to conclusions and say something back which just makes matters worse, and so it might be a case of the less said, the better. So let me now turn to the BBC. I don't know if you've been following this story. It certainly seems to be a pretty huge story in the UK. So, the BBC has been criticised for a long time. And, the criticism, well, one criticism is that the people employed by the BBC tend to be quite sort of woke, sort of a metropolitan elite. They have particular views on, for example, transgender or Israel or what else. They all vote. They'll all vote Labour. Most of them will vote Labour. You're not going to get any Conservative or Reform, or you're going to get, or rather, you can count them on the fingers of one hand, kind of thing. Voters of right-wing parties like the Conservative or Reform, those kind of people, they don't get involved with the BBC, and so it is it has a maybe it's a stereotype, but it's regarded as being captured by a sort of woke, progressive groups, and then this reflects its news coverage and how it reports the news. And what we've just had now is an article in the Daily Telegraph. I think it came out on November the 3rd, talking about an incident when a speech by Donald Trump, I think it was his speech on January the 6th, 2021, after the Capitol Hill things, where it was cut. So they cut out a big chunk of it and then brought two sections together to make it sound as if he was advocating violence and so on, when he wasn't. He was doing the opposite. And so this was clearly a case of doctoring the evidence. And now it's come out, Trump is threatening to sue for massive amounts of money. I don't know whether he can. But the BBC's reputation is in tatters. And so I thought it would be a good idea to look at the BBC and some of the charts of the BBC. So the BBC's been around for over 100 years. It came together on October the 18th, 1922. So that is like 103 years ago. And I don't have a time for this, but a few things that I do notice is that it's got the South Node in Pisces. I think that's important, the fact that it's got the South Node in Pisces. That's the thing that stands out to me, South Node in Pisces. And of course, the North Node in Virgo. And, if you've got the North Node in Virgo and you've got the South Node in Pisces, that's perhaps telling you what you should be as an organization. North Node in Virgo, you stick to the facts. There is something disciplined about North Node in Virgo. You don't get caught up with your own feelings about the matter. You are objective, and of course that is what the BBC did to build its reputation, to be objective. You can trust the BBC. I mean, that's the general view. Other people have their opinions, but you can trust the BBC to be objective and to tell you the facts and as they stand. North Node in Virgo. Now, the line of least resistance maybe is the South Node in Pisces. You don't want to fall into that South Node in Pisces. And the South Node in Pisces is the issue of being swayed by the way you feel, being swayed by the times in which you're living. And of course it perhaps relates to the subjectivity of those working for the organization. Now, when you've got a chart like this, as it develops, I think it's likely to get stronger. It's likely to become sort of more fixed, in terms of the way it is. Now, I mean, if you look at the chart, it's a Libran. It's got a lot of stuff in Libra. It's got Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, Saturn in Libra, and the Mercury-Saturn conjunction is quite good, I would have said. It's good to have Saturn in Libra. I mean, the United States has Saturn in Libra. It gives you permanence. It's very likely that the BBC came into being during the hours of daylight. I mean, I think that this was like there were various organizations and companies that got together to form the BBC on October the 18th, 22. It wasn't like an act of Parliament. So I think it's likely that the BBC came into being during the hours of daylight. And of course, if it was the hours of daylight, that gives Saturn extra strength. Saturn is a diurnal planet, and so it works best in the daytime, and it's in a positive masculine sign. So it's a strong Saturn, and being above the horizon, and it's conjunct Mercury, and so Saturn conjunct Mercury. Well, you could say that is the objectivity, and that is the discipline in terms of the way the organization communicates. Now, there are other things going on. Venus in Sagittarius. You could say Venus in Sagittarius is about the global reach, the BBC World Service, and so you've got that. And so that's one chart. There are other charts to look at. For example, there is the chart of the first radio broadcast on November the 14th, 1922. And so this I think it took place at 6 p.m. Yeah, I mean, there are some similarities in this chart, and you've got Mercury-Jupiter conjunction. So Mercury's moved away from the Saturn, and so it's making a Jupiter as a radio broadcast. That's good. A South Node is still in Pisces, so things haven't changed that much. As far as which chart to use, well, there are other charts. There's a Royal Charter chart. There's also the TV chart, when it had its first broadcast of a television program. And of course, this current issue relates to BBC television. And so here is the first television broadcast, November the 2nd, 1936. I mean, this was not the beginning of regular television programs. It was the way the BBC was going, but of course the Second World War got in the way, so they had to delay all of that. But it's perhaps a chart that we need to think about, because we do have, well, for a start, we have an exact time, 3 p.m, coming from I've gone for Hornsey. there's a big park in North London. I get them mixed up. Alexandra Park. I think it was from Alexandra Palace. I always get sort of Crystal Palace and Alexandra Palace mixed up. Crystal Palace is in South London. Alexandra Palace is in North London. So I think it was from Alexandra Palace. And so there's there's a Mars Neptune conjunction, and that might say something. That Mars Neptune conjunction, that might be the shadow of BBC television. Plus the fact you've got Pisces rising, and when we're talking about the shadow of BBC's television, you've got that Jupiter in Sagittarius, square Mars. There is a moralism there in that BBC TV chart with that Jupiter in Sagittarius, quite close to the midheaven. I mean, it's nice to have Jupiter in the midheaven conjunct in Sagittarius, conjunct the North Node, but it's a very self-righteous Jupiter. And yeah, it is square Mars. So as far as what was going on at the time, well, I've gone for the Telegraph article. It was published on November the 3rd. I don't know when exactly it came out, but you can certainly buy newspapers certainly by midnight. That's when they hit the stand. So I've gone for midnight on November the 3rd, London time. And if we look at the very first BBC chart, when the BBC formed, when it became BBC, October the 18th, it's that South Node, in Pisces. Neptune was at 2945 Pisces. It was on Neptune's. It was on the South Node. It was also on the South Node. If you look at the chart for the next month, where you had the first radio broadcast, Neptune is still on the South Node. And I think that the BBC, because of that South Node, has really been influenced by Neptune's passage through Pisces. And Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, I've talked about Neptune Pisces before. I think Neptune in Pisces is about wokeness. It's about getting obsessed with particular causes, and feeling you need to maybe change the news or change the evidence in terms of how you report it. Clearly they wanted something to support their idea that Donald Trump was a bad person, so they changed a video. They changed the film. They edited it and spliced it to create the evidence they were looking for to support their program. And I've talked about Neptune in Pisces and the transgender issue. There was a recent case where there was a newsreader, and she was supposed to read something, and it said pregnant people, and she changed it and she said pregnant people, and then she corrected herself by saying pregnant women, and this was perceived as being anti-trans, that she'd had some eyebrow movement. And so she was working for the BBC. She was a newsreader for the BBC, and so she was censored by the BBC because of what she did. And so that's seen as an example of what the agenda of the BBC is. And with Neptune in Pisces on the BBC's South Node, the line of least resistance for the BBC is to just get over emotional about things, to get caught up in whatever cause might be fashionable at the time, but particularly if it's a progressive cause. And so I think that we could see the South Node working here. Also, Mercury is conjunct Venus. So you'd think Mercury conjunct Venus wouldn't be so bad, for the BBC, but Mercury conjunct Venus, well, this is when a newspaper came out, and Venus, you could say, is about its public reputation, maybe its global reputation, may even, and so Mercury hitting Venus, something really really came into being, and Venus was also conjunct its Sun. I think that Venus at 25/4 Leo, about 24, Venus on its Sun. Why would that be relevant? Well, we've got some Chiron stuff going on. Chiron is at 24 degrees. There was a Venus Chiron opposition at the time of the Daily Telegraph article coming up right across the BBC's Sun. So why would that be relevant? I mean, it doesn't make entirely a lot of sense, but it does make sense when we look at the solar arc directions to the BBC. So the BBC is 103 years old. So we're moving the Sun. We're moving every planet 103 degrees. So solar arc directed Pluto was at, or is at, 2531 Libra. So if we move natal Pluto, so Pluto at the time that the BBC came into being was at there's Pluto, but if we move it approximately 101 degrees, that takes us to 25 Libra. So now we can start making some sense of the Telegraph article and that Venus Chiron opposition. So in other words, solar arc directed Pluto was at 25 Libra. So it had just gone past the Sun, and that Venus Chiron opposition was bringing up Pluto's solar arc direction back into play, and in particular the Chiron. I mean, the Chiron opposition to Sun. This is a wounded organization. It has a real wound. I mean, its wound was perhaps its obsession with wokeness, and I don't know, whatever you can use whatever symbolism you like there, and so that's hitting its Sun. And finally, I just wanted to quickly look at the link between Donald Trump and the BBC chart. And so here is Donald Trump. I mean, it is quite incredible how much influence Donald Trump has. I mean, he just gets everywhere. I don't think there's quite been a president like this for getting everywhere, for just having this influence. It's just completely weird that his presence or the BBC's reaction to Trump. You could say it's their Trump derangement syndrome, that they felt it. They felt they had to criticize him. It was the right thing to do. It's what the metropolitan elite that were part of the BBC, they were quite happy with this. And so turning to Donald Trump and the BBC and how they relate to one another. So if we look at the chart, let me find it. It's here. Here it is. So we've got the BBC in the middle, and we've got Donald Trump, on the outer wheel. One thing I do notice is the BBC's Mercury is at 1749 Libra, approximately, and Jupiter has his Jupiter is on BBC's Mercury. So how would that work? Now you might say that with Donald Trump's Jupiter on Mercury, there's something about Donald Trump and his ideas, him as a politician, his Jupiter, that really triggers the BBC. I mean, we're saying this with hindsight. I mean, I think if this was just a synastry between two people, you would think someone having their Jupiter on your Mercury, you might think that this person with their Jupiter would make you feel good about yourself. That Donald Trump would make the BBC feel good about itself. Now, but obviously, that's not the case. So we have to look at another interpretation, and I think it's just that the whole presence of the whole presence of Trump, his whole, maybe his ideas, his larger than life personality, it certainly triggers the BBC and encourages them to say things and to put out programs, and maybe even encourages them to cut up videos and to change the film so that it supports their case. And we have been talking about the BBC with their sun at 24 Libra, and it's an important point, this sun. I've already described how at the time when a Telegraph article came out, there was a Venus-Chiron opposition on that sun, plus the BBC's solar arc directed Pluto was on that sun. But then you've got Trump, who has got a Venus-Saturn conjunction at 23, 24, Saturn at 23 Cancer, Venus at 25 Cancer. So his Venus-Saturn conjunction is square the BBC's sun, and I think that really is quite important. And so what is that Venus-Saturn conjunction? It's almost like Trump with that Venus-Saturn conjunction has the capacity to destroy things. I mean, for him, maybe it works quite well. I mean, you could say that the Venus-Saturn conjunction relates to women, but I think we can take it further than that. Maybe Venus is about perhaps entertainment, how people get on with each other, but it's also maybe just about Saturn. And that Venus-Saturn conjunction is really messing up the BBC, and I think that is that's perhaps quite important. And I did say that Trump's Jupiter is on the BBC's Mercury, but so is his Uranus. So his Uranus, because Trump has a Jupiter-Uranus trine, so his Jupiter-Uranus trine really hits BBC's Mercury, and this is perhaps a sign that it doesn't, always work so well. And one other observation to make about the BBC, we don't know where the BBC's moon is. Not really. I mean, if we take that first chart for October the 18th, assuming it happened in working hours, we can say its moon is somewhere between, 21 and 27 Virgo. But if it's at 25 Virgo, remember Saturn is approximately opposition the BBC's moon. And the moon represents the public. And remember with the BBC, there is a license fee. If you've got a television, you've got to pay. I don't live in the UK, but it's something like £400, which would be, $500 you have to pay a year. And so perhaps it's all about the BBC losing support from the public with Saturn opposition, with transiting Saturn opposition its moon. So I think we can see to some extent how things might be going wrong for the BBC, but I do think that fundamentally the real problem is the BBC's Neptune its south node in Pisces, and it's getting into its south node. It should not be getting into its south node. The BBC should be getting into its north node, Virgo, being sensible, sticking to the facts. And the south node in Pisces, that south node in Pisces does also link with the UK chart. So if we look at the UK chart, the UK has its moon at 29 Pisces. And so, we already know that if we take the 1066 chart, that Saturn and Neptune are on the UK's moon, on moon, or at least one of the charts of the UK. I know that in 1066 it was England rather than Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland, but it sort of links with the moon. And the UK has England has the South Node in Pisces. England getting obsessed about diversity and trans stuff and human rights, and obsessive obsession with human rights. In such a way that just completely diverts the concentration of the country in extreme levels. Giving reparations for slavery. This is South Node in Pisces. South Node in Pisces this is not where Britain should be. Britain should reside in its North Node in Virgo. That's where Britain should work best. And so, in a way, Britain and the BBC have the same problem. They're going down their lines of least resistance with that South Node in Pisces, and they are just acting in the wrong way. And I do think that Saturn on the BBC's South Node, and Neptune, at the moment it's Neptune on the BBC's South Node, and Neptune also on England's moon. It just says so much. So anyway, those are some thoughts on the BBC. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.